I'm Mary McDonald, Head of Conservation at WWF Canada. At WWF Canada, we have a 10-year strategy to regenerate Canada. We're focusing on 4 major types of activities. Complex ecosystem restoration towards 1 million hectares restored by 2030, stewarded and protected areas towards over 100 million hectares by 2030. Wildlife and industry work, it focuses on areas where habitat is at risk from industrial activities, and we largely there focus on shipping, mining, and forestry. And of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by avoiding conversion of natural carbon sinks and strengthening ecosystems so that they're better able to pull in and hold carbon. We also strive to do all our work where we can, according to support and be useful to the priorities of Indigenous nations and communities in the areas where we work. We have a great panel with us today, and they're going to bring us a variety of perspectives on blue carbon. And we'll get back to them in a sec. But I just thought, first, you might be asking, why blue carbon? Sorry. We know that about 20 to 30% of the atmosphere disruptive carbon comes from the destruction of carbon sinks over the last 100 years. Things like peatlands, watersheds, wetlands, forested lands, grasslands, and so on, and also carbon-rich coastal zones. More than 20 years ago, you'll recall the global community started looking at forests to help with climate change. And of course, that's now expanded to include a wide array of interventions with different types of ecosystems that we now refer to as nature-based climate solutions. But, you know, blue carbon is special. It is particularly high in its ability to store carbon. Estimates are approximately 10 times or more per cubic meter carbon storage compared to terrestrial zones. And also the thing about nature-based solutions that we all know is that they not only help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they also help increase biodiversity. Blue carbon restoration and protection activities can also help local economic development. For instance, increasing the viability of natural resources in coastal areas can help improve fisheries and therefore the well-being of local communities. At WWF Canada, we've spent a few years working on blue carbon. We've done a fair amount of mapping throughout Canada. Where is the blue carbon? We've done an initial review of financial mechanisms that might be useful for blue carbon. We have some early restoration and protection projects underway on coastal carbon with Indigenous communities and also non-Indigenous communities. And new for us now, emerging, is a national blue carbon knowledge hub. I'd also like to say today that we're very grateful for the newly announced, although not yet widely announced, I think that's going to happen on Thursday, funding from the Government of Canada to support our implementing partners at WWF Madagascar on blue carbon work. This is going to support coastal restoration and other types of protections work in the Nosy Hara Marine Protected Area. But the other interesting thing about this funding is that it allows for us to bring people that are experts from Madagascar working on blue carbon and coastal restoration to Canada to share their knowledge with people in Canada doing the same type of work. So a true knowledge sharing opportunity that we're also very excited about. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to our panel. Just very briefly. Sorry, everyone. Just to my left and moving along here. So to my left is Feno Rakatundrasua, who is the Conservation Director of WWF Madagascar. Then we have Andrew Hurst, Executive Director of Climate Finance at Global Affairs Canada. Kim Jensen, Manager of Advancing Coastal Wetlands Conservation from the Pew Charitable Trust. and then Kim Neal, who's the VP of Resilient Habitats at WWF Canada. So I'm just going to ask everybody a question that allows them to tell you a little bit about the work that they're doing, and then we'll follow that with a little bit of discussion and leave some time for Q&A if you're interested. Okay, so Feno, can you tell us a little bit about the coastal conservation work you're doing in Western Madagascar? Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. Hi, everyone. So I will be talking about our work in coastal and marine area, focused in the western coast of Madagascar. So including the Nusihara Marine National Park, which will be supported by the funding from the Global Affairs of Canada. Also the Ambaru Bay in the northwestern, where we have a big mangrove covers in this area. In the western part also, quite big mangrove covers. And in the southwestern, we have amazing coral reef biodiversity. So this, I will be talking mostly about, as we are talking about blue carbon, I will be talking about mangroves, but also coral reef, including the seagrass. So these mangroves, the mangrove of Madagascar cover about 300,000 hectares, quite big, part of the mangrove in the Southwest Indian Ocean. And in terms of coral reef also, we have one of the most resilient coral reef in the region. And both mangroves and coral reef plays an important role in terms of service ecosystemic for coastal communities in the region. So these coastal communities, they are, I can say, vulnerable. They depend highly on these resources, or mangrove and coral reef and the ecosystem services provided. And they are also highly vulnerable to climate change. For these, the mangroves and coral reef, mangroves are mainly threatened by the illegal logging, by the charcoal production, and coral reefs are mainly threatened by the unsustainable practice of fisheries. Yeah, apart from that, I can say also that we have not only at local level, SISCAP level, but almost at all level, a lack of coordination and the governance of natural resources and the blue economy. So faced with these challenges, our work at WWF Madagascar, we are working at the level of protected areas, marine protected areas, and community-based natural resources management to protect the existing mangroves and coral reefs ecosystem. We are supporting patrolling, ecological monitoring, and conservation activities. We are also implementing restoration work, mainly on mangroves. We are supporting mangrove restoration. For coral reef, we are just starting because it's, we don't have much experience on that. We are conducting pilot activities. Apart from that, as I said, the communities, coastal communities are vulnerable. We are working in improving this, the resilience of these communities by first supporting the sustainable management of fisheries, promoting the climate resilience through early warning system, through climate insurance, and something like that. And also supporting governance activities like marine spatial planning. And yeah, as a result, I can say that we have seen a reduction of deforestation, I mean mangrove loss, also the loss of degradation of coral reef due to unsustainable fisheries practice reduced. The resilience, the capacity of communities to cope with climate change also, we can say that that increased. Yeah, it seems that we are doing great work, but I want to say that it's not enough. There are a lot of challenges, and it's not enough. So there is a need for a lot of activities, and we need to implement in, rapidly, more effectively, and on a bigger scale in order to achieve the local challenges and the global, to address local challenges and the global goal. So just to conclude, I want to say three things. The first one is that we are talking about the blue carbon, the coastal ecosystem. The one thing I want to say is that this ecosystem, I mean mangrove and coral reef, are vital for coastal communities. Their daily life depends on these ecosystems. These ecosystems provide their daily food, so it's vital for them. The second one is that the scale matters. We are doing a lot of things since several years, but we need to do something at scale. So we need to implement in a bigger scale. We need to implement in a much longer term. And we need much more resources, financial resources and other resources. And the last thing I want to say is that we are talking about coastal ecosystem, blue carbon, but we've learned that we cannot address these challenges without addressing the challenges in the watershed, in the highlands, because it's closely linked. Early this year in March, we've had a cyclone in the north part of Madagascar, and the cyclone there was a lot of rainfall, and we have supported communities to cope to climate change by early warning system and something like that, but they have not been capacitated to face to flooding, to disaster from the upstream. So it's why it's not working to intervene alone within the coastal area. We need to integrate, to have this integrated approach at the landscape level, including the highlands, the watershed, and the coastal area. Thank you.
Thanks, Fano. That makes so much sense. The last point in particular, that was so. Andrew, could you? I was gonna. Andrew. Yeah, sorry, Andrew. Could you tell us a little bit about nature and climate funding from the perspective of Global Affairs Canada?
Sure, thanks, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to say a few words that will hopefully provide a bit of that broader context for why Canada is funding this particular initiative. So we see the what's often referred to as the triple crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution as being not only things that need to be addressed urgently, but things that don't happen within a vacuum. There are also crises that are very much linked to questions of poverty and inequality, which is why the kinds of programming and financing that we have in place is very much anchored within our broader feminist international assistance policy. And it determines not only the amount of funding we have to work with, but who we work with, how we work with them, and the kinds of things we work on. And I think this project is an interesting example of where these things all come together. So in terms of the financing, Canada we're currently in the fourth year of a 5-year, $5.3 billion climate finance commitment. This was made back in 2021. It amongst other things, is financing some nature-based solutions work. There's $315 million envelope, which is supporting nature-based solutions activities that generate biodiversity co-benefits. Most of this is happening in sub-Saharan Africa. There's also a very small but very exciting $15 million Indigenous Peoples Partnering for Climate initiative that was just announced earlier by Minister Hussen. Again, that's focused on nature-based solutions that deliver biodiversity co-benefits. That's on the climate side of things. We also have a standalone international biodiversity program We've provided $200 million to the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. This was announced back at the GEF Council in August 2023 when it was held in Vancouver. In addition, there's a $350 million international biodiversity program, and that's the pocket of money that's supporting this project in particular. So maybe just the last thing to say before passing it on to colleagues. I mentioned that because we think about these crises as environmental ones, but also social and economic ones, we do think about and try and focus on the most vulnerable communities and peoples when we look to finance activities. This can include women and girls and Indigenous peoples, but we don't see these individuals and groups as victims only. They're also very much individuals and actors that have great ideas and can contribute to addressing the very crises that we're all collectively facing. And so again, we're very interested to hear a bit more about this project in Madagascar and to see how it unfolds, and very much look forward to the conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Andrew. That was great. Okay, Kim Jensen, can you speak to the work that Pew is doing in the Southwest Indian Ocean, primarily on mapping, mapping blue carbon?
Yeah, happy to. And again, thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to talk about this work. So just a bit of background on the project itself. So the Advancing Coastal Wetland Conservation Project seeks to provide the technical and research assistance needed to help countries include ambitious commitments to coastal wetlands within their NDCs. We currently work in 10 countries throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as East Africa. Before talking about the seagrass mapping project, though, I think it's important to lay the kind of groundwork about where seagrass is. So seagrass, unfortunately, is being lost at a rate of 7% per year, but the losses across East Africa are sadly much higher than that. Approximately 26% of all seagrass across the Eastern Africa region has been lost since 1960. It's one of the least protected ecosystems, and part of that comes from the fact that it's one of the least understood ecosystems. There's currently a poor understanding of where seagrass is. So the current current global map of seagrass is really a patchwork map of uses of different types of methods and different time scales that have all been thrown together. So our regional mapping project was really born out of the work that we did in Seychelles back in 2021 to complete a map as well as a carbon assessment in Seychelles across its entire EEZ. We completed this with a number of partners, including Oxford University, University of Seychelles, SEICAT, and others, to help support Seychelles' NDC commitments. And we were really excited that linkage between research and policy was there, because Seychelles committed to protect 50% of its mangroves and seagrass by 2025 and 100% by 2030. We were very grateful to play a small role in that effort. And we're also very excited that Seychelles announced in 2023 that they had already achieved 99% protection as of that moment. So they are already very far ahead of that goal of 100% by 2030. So our regional mapping effort, which is called SWIM, so Seagrass in the Western Indian Ocean Mapping and Management Project, it had its official kickoff meeting last month. It's going to use the same methods and same approach that we used in Seychelles, effectively remote sensing, followed by ground truthing across selected sites. So this ground truthing is really important because seagrass can look like a number of different ecosystems if you're just looking at satellite maps. You can confuse it with algae, many other things. So unless you ground truth, your estimate could be quite wrong. In Seychelles, an earlier map estimated that there were 2 million hectares of seagrass across Seychelles' entire EEZ. There's actually 160,000 hectares of seagrass. So if you're basing policy or financing mechanisms based on data that's inaccurate, you're not going to be designing the right policies or financing mechanisms potentially. So our projects across Kenya, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania will use that same process, including working in partnership with local communities, local researchers. And we think that's really important when you co-design a project like that, because it ensures local ownership, and you're also ensuring that you're incorporating local knowledge into the project. It also helps ensure that the government, if they're co-designing it with you, will be able to better use those maps in policy development, including designing potential NDC commitments. We recognize especially the importance of working with local researchers and research institutions is that they have really valuable knowledge about these ecosystems. So while we might be able to help strengthen capacity, there is already quite a bit of capacity in each and every single one of these 4 countries. In Madagascar, we are very excited to be working with Toliara University. They have helped design the work that we're putting forward. It's across 10 sites, mostly focusing on the western side of the country. But those sites were selected in partnership with Toliara. Oxford is helping lead some of the coordination of this, and we're also working in partnership with AMSA and the Nairobi Convention, because these policies should be locally driven, they should be country-led. So helping do that, helping ensure that coordination really helps ensure that process moves forward in a locally led way. Pew sees itself as helping to lead the coordination of the process, but we recognize the need for a country-driven process. So we're excited that the field work is getting started in Madagascar very soon. We are excited that we will deliver the maps in roughly 2026. It's going to go through the ground truthing process and with the local partners. So we're really hoping that this mapping project can give countries the confidence to ensure that they make strong commitments to seagrass in their NDC that will be submitted in 2025. So happy to answer any questions about the project later.
Thank you, Kim. So, Kim Neal, could you speak to us about a project in Newfoundland, Canada with the Mia Wapukak First Nation? Thanks a lot.
Chimigwach, thank you, Mary. That's so great. I love how there's like this seagrass theme across us, because I'm about to talk about eelgrass. And truly like reiterate the importance of mapping but ground truthing. That is just such a key to blue carbon. Every day, you know, I feel very honored and continuously humbled by the work our team is doing on the East Coast to support Indigenous leadership in conservation every day. I'm particularly proud of one of our senior specialists, Chelsea Boiler, and our partners at Mia Wapukak First Nation, who are working together to create a bioregional cooperation for the protection of over 900,000 hectares of a new national marine and protected area. But, you know, just to get an idea of this, like, you know, WWF Canada, Mary mentioned this earlier, you know, we did a great blue carbon map of Canada, all over Canada, and we really did identify these hot pockets of eelgrasses and salt marshes. But we absolutely know that that mapping, which is just, you know, at the end of the day, remote sensing and really just a projection of carbon. So when the Mia Wapukak First Nation approached us in 2020, really interested in learning more about blue carbon and how it could actually support their biocultural protection of these eelgrasses, we were absolutely game and ready to get on the ground and support. You know, this particular eelgrass area that we've been doing some carbon monitoring in, it's about a 500,000 hectare area that's actually adjacent to and right next to the 900,000 hectare proposed NMCA area. And the Mia Wapukak First Nation actually would prefer to prioritize the protection of the 500,000 hectares of eelgrass. Why? Of course, yes, it has greater blue carbon and sequestration values and an opportunity to recreate you know, some really unique financing mechanisms, but also because it supports biocultural species. Atlantic cod, salmon, that is where the Mia Wapukak have been protecting that area since time immemorial. Blue carbon is only going to support their work in expanding protections within their traditional territories. And so that's just a little bit about our project and how we sort of came about it from a blue carbon lens. But now, fast forward to 2024, not only have we, really created a robust monitoring program in collaboration with Miyupik First Nation, we are not leading anything. We are absolutely supporting, and I think it's just a really great example about how WWF Canada supports Indigenous-led conservation on every single coast of our country, and ultimately that technical work is supporting Indigenous-led priorities for new protected areas, and it really is driving that 30 by 30 goal for specifically for marine protected areas in that region. So really excited to see how that's actually now expanding into species at risk, into eDNA monitoring, all supporting their long-term visions. And all of that work ultimately is also going to support really innovative, great new financing mechanisms to support their long-term stewardship goals. And at the end of the day, that is our Regenerate Canada goal of 100 million hectares of stewarded lands and waters is really, it's not just about starting those monitoring programs, but making sure that they can last forever. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for that. So I want you've all heard each other, and you've given this a little bit of thought because this panel's been planned for a little while. And so I wonder if we could just go down the panel again, and maybe you could share your thoughts on some opportunities you see for coastal conservation efforts in the short term. However, or barriers to it, if that's something that's on your mind as well. So maybe, would you like to share that? Fenno, do you have some thoughts?
Thank you, Mary. As an opportunity, I can share two things. The first one is network-based solutions, and the second one is commitment. For network-based solutions, it's not something new. Nature always provided solution for us, but which is new, I think, in my opinion, is that currently almost everyone agree that network-based solutions are crucial for us in order to achieve our global goal for climate change mitigation, for adaptation. The global biodiversity framework emphasizes the importance of the network-based solution, and we have implemented that in the field, and we know that it's working, but we need to implement more effectively and rapidly and in a much larger scale. So it's for blue carbon, we need to implement mangrove conservation, coral reef, and seagrass conservation, protection, and restoration in a much larger scale in order to achieve a global goal. The second thing is that commitment. So related to my first point also is that we have a lot of commitment currently with the public sector, but also a lot of commitment from the private sectors. So we need to transform these commitment into actions. We need to implement this commitment, and we need to have impact. I think this commitment constitutes a big opportunity for us to address challenges. So thank you.
Thanks, Fenno. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, maybe just two. Again, being the observer from 50,000 feet, it strikes me that these kinds of projects are really interesting examples of things that we have long hoped would happen, but have taken a long time to appear in practice. The communities, whether it's environmental communities and NGOs, development NGOs, Indigenous peoples and organizations, for too long they worked in parallel. And I think now that we're beginning to finally realize that you can't make progress in any sustainable way without working together and recognizing in particular where things have to be done within a rights framework, where there are responsibilities on different layers of government to support and make these things happen. So I don't like to talk about models because that implies things can be replicated easily. But what I hope when I hear projects like this is that there's adequate. I think there's an opportunity to really share experiences to other parts of the world, and it's great that we're having this today with Canada and Madagascar, but to show how the coming together of these different actors that haven't traditionally always come together in very productive ways can happen in practice for the benefit of people and planet. Thanks.
On the first part about opportunities, I think it's been really exciting to hear how your work and the work that you've been engaged in, that science backing policy is really critical. I think that's been a great opportunity, and it's just an opportunity to ensure that whatever financing opportunities or financing mechanisms are put in place in countries, or whatever policies that they're backed by science. So it's really exciting to see the growth of that. I think if I'm looking at a challenge, I think both Andrew and Fenno, you both mentioned a little bit in your answers, but the lack of coordination and the siloing that we've seen. There are places where there's great research going on, but it doesn't go across government agencies or it doesn't go across partners. And so when you don't have that information shared, it leads to incomplete solutions. So I think that that's one challenge that, as the broader environment, international community, we need to try to ensure that whatever solutions we're putting in place, that we're talking to one another well, whether that be government or NGOs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that challenge. Like, the challenges are great, and I really want to maybe come back, Fenno, to one of the things that you said earlier, that connectedness, right, between our terrestrial ecosystems, like further up in this watershed, in the Conn River watershed, that the Mi'kmaq steward and protect and have been protecting since time immemorial. There's a hydro dam. And that hydro dam is impacting the salinity of the eelgrass area. It is the biggest threat to that eelgrass and blue carbon. And so first of all, us getting these monitoring programs on the ground is like this essential first step. But that connectivity is really important. And it's really why we are also supporting this First Nation in particular to do some terrestrial protections up watershed. And that's like this a really essential part for permanence. And so I think maybe that's a great transition to an opportunity. I really, really humbly submit to COP29 and in the backdrop of Article 6 and some of these new mechanisms moving forward, even in Canada, in our country, the Canadian government is really leading the way in developing some regulatory markets for carbon, but they're focused on forests. And I think in the next 5 years, and it has to be in the short term, there's got to be some regulatory markets for carbon in Canada for blue carbon. I think this work will contribute to that. And one of the things that I'm really just hoping for and that I dream of at night is that Indigenous peoples are recognized for permanence. You do not have a marine protected area in Canada unless an Indigenous nation is participating and working on it. They are the permanence. They are also, I respectfully submit, the additionality. Additionality is not going to work the same in blue carbon ecosystems as it does in forestry. Indigenous peoples are the additionality in these ecosystems, and we cannot continue to calculate additionality on a number of these really innovative financing mechanisms the same way that we've been doing in forestry and terrestrial programs, and I think it's going to look a lot different. And so one of the innovative things that I'm really watching in Canada is our coastal First Nations on the West Coast. Coast, our brothers and sisters on the West Coast, who are developing the very first blue carbon indigenous-led protocol that I think should inform our regulatory market in Canada. And I believe if that happens, we will see a whole new slew of scalable blue carbon financing mechanisms that center Indigenous rights, Indigenous-led permanence, Indigenous-led additionality.
Here. Thanks, Kim. Thanks. Yeah. So there's another question here. I don't know. I think some of you kind of answered it, but if you want to speak to it, would be great. Sometimes you get this sense the reason we did the blue carbon as well is because nature and climate are a little bit low on the agenda, maybe at this COP for one thing, and we have to keep these really interesting nature-based solutions front and center. But of nature-based solutions, perhaps blue carbon is the one that's least understood and to some extent least well known. And I just wonder if anybody on the panel has any ideas about how we might sort of change that, make it a better known, better understood. Any ideas? Anybody want to reflect on it? Maybe that's not one. Maybe
That's a hard question,
I
right?
know, I know.
I don't think I'm going to have a complete answer for it, but I think that one thing that we've tried to do is around education and awareness. So in Seychelles, for example, there was no differentiation between like algae and seagrass. So the same stuff that you would see like on your wall, that was the same word that they were using for seagrass. So one interesting part of the project that our partner, SACAT, we were very grateful that they brought this to us, like, hey, we think we need new words for seagrass. We need new words to capture this ecosystem because it's not working to have the same word to describe a scummy thing that people don't want to see sometimes. Algae is also good in other ways, but so they went out and they spoke with local communities, they spoke with fishers, and they developed 5 new words for seagrass in Seychelles Creole. So those are now included in the Seychelles Creole Dictionary. It was locally led, it was locally driven. They picked the words that were ultimately chosen for those, but that helps increase awareness around the importance of these ecosystems, because not only are you having words that describe them, you're also then talking to the communities about why they're important as well. So it feels like, yes, there's a lack of understanding, but there's also then an opportunity to hopefully have some conversations that will increase the awareness about these important ecosystems.
That's a fantastic example. Thank you, Kim. I think maybe should we move to questions? Are there any questions from the audience today? Anybody? Yeah.
I think there were already some really good points raised about marine protected areas, but I wanted to hear a bit more about how, by using blue carbon as a framework, not just to protect the seagrass, for example, but the connected ecosystems and species, and how that's being advanced through your work.
Do you want to try to take that one?
Yeah, I will try. So, yeah, I will share about our. It's working? Okay. I will share about the work in the Nusihara marine protected areas. The Nusihara marine protected areas is, in terms of coral reef, is exceptional. It's very rich in terms of coral reef and the seagrass. So our work is much more. We are talking about blue carbon, but we are not, as I said, we are much more experienced on mangroves instead of seagrass. We know just that in the coral reef we have the seagrass, and by protecting the coral reef we are protecting seagrass, but we are not able to measure the impact on that. So just to respond to the previous question, I think in terms of opportunity, the work the Pew is doing with the University of Tulare is really exciting, and we will discuss about that later. But just one thing to say. For the question is that Yeah, apart from the blue carbon and the seagrass, the most important thing, we are currently developing our new strategic plan 2026-2030. And one of the change, I would say big change in the strategic plan in the Madagascar is that we will ensure this habitat connectivity of coral reef in this western part of Madagascar, because it's really important in terms of habitat and the species. We are talking about marine turtles. We are talking about the species and fisheries product living in this coral reef. So yeah, thank you.
Any other thoughts? No? The two Kims? Okay. Anybody else have a question? Pretty, yeah? Oh, somebody, this person.
Apologies if you might have already touched upon it in the panel, but I'm from the Maldives, from an NGO called Maldives Space Research Organization. We've been primarily leveraging Earth observation data in order to kind of attempt to do natural capital accounting and benefit conflict. And something that we've noticed is open source data and the commercially available data sets that are there just aren't, they can't provide the high resolution required in order to capture the detail required to do a meaningful assessment of a place like Maldives. And I guess, do you guys know?
Oops, come in maybe a
Yeah.
little, yeah.
Do you guys know of any other, like any attempts at trying to have an equatorial constellation of satellites so that it fits the needs and requirements of the small island nations or other equatorial nations? Yeah, just wanted to.
I think Kim Jensen's the most likely, or do you know about the satellites at the, yeah, okay, go ahead.
One organization that we have used to get like better natural capital asset valuations done, and that, like, I'm an ecological economist, like this, like natural capital valuations is like my jive. So thank you for asking that question. Planet.org. We have used it in a few locations in Canada to do some natural capital valuations, like both terrestrially and in the marine space. Right now, I would say it is fairly cost prohibitive, but it is the best, highest resolution, and we've been able to fill in gaps. And so one of the ways that we've kind of been able to, in that particular situation, to manage some of the costs is like we take the open source stuff, and then the areas where we're missing the gaps, that's when we pay like an organization like Planet.org that has those really high resolution satellite imagery to like 1-2 meter to do it, and then we go out and we ground truth, because that is like the essential piece. Even that high resolution stuff is still like the Seychelles situation is happening, and so we know that example is a perfect example of the essential component of ground truthing and actually paying the money to do it. And I think slowly but surely the private sector, the public sector, the philanthropic sector is coming along and really understanding that it's going to cost, and it is going to potentially have a high cost of entry into those financing mechanisms to get that work done, so that we could actually structure some really interesting financing mechanisms to cover that. But I would love to know what your answer might be to this.
I mean, I thought your answer was great. So I was just going to say, regardless of the data, trying to go out and do that ground truthing is really important. Yeah. It also is expensive, right? But I think that comes back to the fact that we need to try wherever possible to ensure high quality data. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think the other thing about the ground truthing is it brings in the communities, right? There's interest, and that's what's happening, right? They understand their communities better on that level as well. And plus we learn stuff from them always, right, that we didn't know. Okay, anybody else got a question? No? Okay, well, before I thank our panelists, I want to say if you liked this panel, we'll be doing a version of it at the Canada Pavilion on Thursday at 1:15, I think. So drop by. And so I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today. It was a great discussion, you guys. And thanks for everybody that showed up, too, and was part of it today. So thank you very much.